Picture this, you're lost in the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on your back. You need tools, food, shelter, maybe fire. Where do you even start? Now imagine you're a Neanderthal living 200,000 years ago in what's now Germany. You need to attach a stone point to a wooden spear. No duct tape, no screws, no modern glue. So you do what your people have done for generations. You make your own adhesive. Not just any glue, a sophisticated compound that requires controlled heating of birch bark in low oxygen conditions. You're basically doing chemistry without a lab. That's exactly what archaeologists found when they discovered Neanderthal tools with birch tar residue. This wasn't lucky fumbling. This was Stone Age engineering, and it happened over 100,000 years before modern humans figured out similar techniques. Welcome to the real story of prehistoric innovation. It's nothing like what you think you know about cavemen. The Schöningen site in Germany gives us an incredible window into prehistoric tech. About 300,000 years ago, someone crafted wooden spears with the precision of a modern engineer. These weren't crude pointed sticks. They were balanced throwing weapons, 2 meters long, made from carefully selected spruce with the center of gravity positioned perfectly for flight. But here's where it gets really interesting. These ancient toolmakers weren't just working with wood and stone, they were conducting chemistry. At multiple Neanderthal sites across Europe, archaeologists found evidence of birch bark tar production dating back 200,000 years. To make this adhesive, you need to heat birch bark to around 340 to 400 degrees Celsius in an environment with very little oxygen. Get the temperature wrong? You burn your bark to ash. Let in too much air? Same result. Get it right? You create strong, waterproof glue perfect for tool making. Think about what this means. These weren't people desperately trying random things until something worked. They had developed a multi-step process that required understanding cause and effect, planning ahead, controlling variables. They knew which trees to select, how to prepare the bark, how to build the right kind of fire, how to time everything perfectly. At Königsau in Germany, researchers found a Neanderthal campsite where someone had been making birch tar around 50,000 years ago. The evidence shows they built a small pit, lined it with bark, covered it with sand and stones, then lit a fire on top. As the bark heated in this low oxygen environment, tar would slowly seep out and collect below. When they dug it up, they had their glue. This is sophisticated pyrotechnology, the controlled use of fire to transform materials. Neanderthals were doing it 100 millennia before modern humans figured out the same techniques. But they weren't just making adhesives. At the Paghetti Vecchi site in Italy, archaeologists discovered 171,000-year-old wooden tools that had been deliberately fire-hardened. Someone was using controlled heat to make their digging sticks stronger. This shows understanding of how fire could change material properties, turning soft wood into something harder and more useful. The precision challenges everything we thought we knew about prehistoric intelligence. This wasn't trial and error. This was applied science, passed down through generations of skilled practitioners who understood their materials as well as any modern craftsperson. Consider the planning required. To make birch tar, you needed to know where to find birch trees, when the bark was at the right stage for harvesting, how to strip it properly without damaging the tree, how to prepare it for processing. You needed to understand different wood properties for building your fire, how to control airflow, how to recognize when the process was working. This knowledge didn't exist in isolation. It was part of a broader technological system: stone tool production, wooden implement manufacture, sophisticated hunting strategies that required these composite weapons, each element built on the others, creating an integrated approach to survival that was both practical and ingenious. For decades, art history had a clear timeline. Cave painting began around 40,000 years ago when modern humans arrived in Europe. They started decorating caves in France and Spain. Before that, nothing. The assumption was that symbolic thinking was unique to our species. It emerged relatively recently. Then, in 2018, everything changed. A team of researchers used a new dating technique on cave paintings in 3 Spanish caves: La Pasiega, Ardales, Maltravieso. What they found rewrote the story of human creativity. Red ochre hand stencils and abstract symbols in these caves were at least 64,000 years old, created long before modern humans ever set foot in Europe. The artists were Neanderthals. At Cueva de los Aviones, also in Spain, archaeologists found perforated marine shells with traces of red and yellow pigments. The shells had been carefully selected, deliberately pierced, painted with colorful ochre. They're about 115,000 years old. Some of the world's oldest known jewelry. This predates modern human arrival in Europe by tens of thousands of years. But perhaps the most striking discovery came from Krapina in Croatia. There, researchers found eagle talons that are 130,000 years old, each bearing cut marks made by stone tools. These weren't food remains. Eagles weren't a significant part of the Neanderthal diet. Instead, these claws appear to have been collected specifically to make jewelry. The pattern of cut marks suggests they were being prepared for wearing, possibly as a necklace or bracelet. Think about what it means to collect eagle talons for decoration. You have to catch or find a large, dangerous bird of prey. You have to recognize that its claws might make attractive ornaments. You have to have some concept of personal adornment, of making yourself look different or special. This isn't just artistic expression, it's symbolic thinking about identity and appearance. The ochre use is equally fascinating. Neanderthals weren't just dabbing red paint randomly. Chemical analysis shows they were mixing different materials to create specific colors and textures. At some sites, they combined red ochre with other minerals to create different shades. At others, they heated the ochre to change its properties, making it more vibrant or easier to apply. This suggests they had aesthetic preferences. They cared about how things looked. They had a sense of beauty, of color, of visual appeal that went beyond mere survival needs. And they weren't working alone. The consistency of techniques across different sites and time periods suggests these skills were being taught and shared. Knowledge was being passed from one generation to the next, creating traditions of artistic expression that lasted for thousands of years. The cave paintings themselves are stunning in their simplicity and power. Hand stencils created by placing a hand against the cave wall and blowing ochre around it. Simple red dots and lines. Abstract symbols whose meaning we can only guess at. But the mere fact that they exist forces us to rethink what it means to be human. What's particularly remarkable is the locations chosen for this art. These weren't casual doodles near cave entrances where people lived day to day. Many paintings are deep inside cave systems, in chambers that would have required torches and careful navigation to reach. Someone made a deliberate decision to venture into these dark, potentially dangerous spaces to create lasting images. Maybe it was part of ritual activities. Maybe it marked important gathering places. Maybe it was simply the prehistoric equivalent of signing your name. Whatever the purpose, it required planning, preparation, and a conception of creating something permanent. These weren't modern humans who looked like us making art that looks familiar. These were our evolutionary cousins, with different faces and different brains, but with the same drive to create, to mark their presence, to leave something beautiful behind. In 1957, archaeologist Ralph Selecki was excavating Shanidar Cave in Iraq. He uncovered something that would change how we think about prehistoric humanity. It was the skeleton of a Neanderthal man, later called Shanidar I. His bones told a remarkable story of survival against all odds. This individual had lived to be about 40 years old, quite elderly for a Neanderthal, but his life had been marked by extraordinary hardship. His right arm was withered and useless, likely from a birth defect or early injury that had left the bone malformed. He was blind in his left eye. He had suffered a crushing head injury that had partially healed but left him likely deaf in one ear. He walked with a severe limp from injuries to his legs and feet. In the harsh world of Ice Age Europe, any one of these disabilities should have been a death sentence. A person who couldn't hunt effectively, who couldn't contribute fully to the group's survival, who required care and protection. Conventional wisdom said such people wouldn't last long in a brutal prehistoric world. But Shanidar I didn't just survive. He thrived for decades. The only way this makes sense is if his community took care of him. Someone had to hunt for him, feed him, protect him from predators and the elements. Someone had to help him move from place to place as the group migrated seasonally. For years and years, other Neanderthals chose to support and care for a group member who couldn't fully support himself. This isn't an isolated case. At Dmanisi in Georgia, archaeologists found the skull of a Homo erectus individual who had lost all but one tooth. He likely suffered from a severe gum infection. Without teeth, this person couldn't have processed tough foods or eaten meat effectively. Yet the bone shows signs of long-term healing. This suggests he lived for months or years after losing his teeth. Someone else was processing his food. These discoveries paint a picture of prehistoric societies that valued their members not just for their productive capacity, but for their humanity. The elderly, the disabled, the injured. They weren't abandoned or left to die. They were cared for, protected, kept as valued members of the community. But why? What evolutionary advantage could there be in caring for those who couldn't contribute to hunting or gathering? The answer might lie in knowledge. Older individuals, even disabled ones, carry decades of accumulated wisdom about the landscape, the seasons, animal behavior, plant resources, tool-making techniques, social relationships. They were living libraries in societies without writing. A grandmother who couldn't walk well might still remember where to find water during a drought, which plants were safe to eat, how to predict weather patterns. The care shown to these individuals also suggests something else: emotional bonds that went beyond mere survival calculations. The Neanderthals who fed Shanidar 1 for years weren't just preserving his knowledge, they were expressing something that looks remarkably like love, loyalty, compassion. This caring behavior required significant social organization. Someone had to coordinate the extra work. Someone had to make sure the disabled person got their share of food even when resources were scarce. Someone had to include them in group movements and provide protection. In a world where we often imagine prehistoric life as harsh, violent, and purely focused on survival, these discoveries remind us of something important. Caring for others, even when it's costly, might be one of the most fundamentally human traits of all. The island of Crete sits in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, separated from the mainland by over 100 kilometers of open water. Today, getting there requires a plane or a substantial boat, but archaeologists have found stone tools on Crete that are at least 130,000 years old, created long before modern humans developed advanced seafaring technology. This discovery suggests that prehistoric humans were capable sailors much earlier than anyone imagined. They were building boats or rafts sophisticated enough to carry people and supplies across substantial stretches of open ocean. They were navigating by stars or landmarks, planning multi-day journeys, successfully colonizing remote islands. This isn't the only impossible technology that prehistoric humans mastered. At sites across Siberia and Central Europe, archaeologists have found bone needles dating back 45,000 years. These aren't crude awls for poking holes. They're precisely crafted needles with eyes small enough to thread with sinew or plant fibers. The bone had to be carefully selected, shaped with stone tools, polished smooth. The eye had to be drilled with incredible precision, using techniques that required steady hands and patience. These needles made tailored clothing possible. Instead of just wrapping animal hides around themselves, Ice Age humans could sew fitted garments. This provided much better protection against cold. Tailored clothing was likely crucial for human survival in the harsh climates of glacial Europe and Asia. Without it, humans might never have been able to colonize the northern latitudes. But the real sophistication shows up in the details. Analysis of wear patterns on these needles suggests they were used for different types of sewing, some for heavy hide work, others for fine detail work on smaller items. This implies not just the ability to make needles, but the development of specialized sewing techniques, possibly different types of thread or cordage. Speaking of cordage, archaeologists have found evidence that prehistoric humans were making rope and string at least 40,000 years ago. Tiny impressions on clay fragments show the twisted pattern of woven fibers. This might seem simple, but making strong, durable rope requires knowledge. Which plants to use, how to process the fibers, how to twist them together for maximum strength. Rope opened up a whole world of possibilities. You could make nets for fishing or trapping. You could lash together poles to build more complex shelters. You could create handles for tools or weapons. You could bind bundles for easier carrying. The invention of cordage was probably as revolutionary for prehistoric humans as the invention of the internet was for us. On land, hunters were developing equally impressive innovations. The atlatl, or spear thrower, appeared in various forms around the world by at least 30,000 years ago. This simple device, essentially a stick with a hook on one end, could double the range and power of a thrown spear. But using one effectively required practice and skill. The thrower had to coordinate their arm motion with the release of the spear, adjust for wind and distance, account for the trajectory of the projectile. Archaeological experiments show that skilled atlatl users could throw spears with enough force to penetrate the hide of a mammoth or bison. This technology gave hunters the ability to kill large, dangerous animals from a safe distance. It dramatically changed the dynamics of big game hunting. These weren't unique geniuses creating one-off inventions. These were ordinary people, our ancestors, solving practical problems with ingenuity and skill. There's a persistent myth about prehistoric life. It goes something like this. Our ancestors lived in constant desperation, spending every waking moment in a brutal struggle for survival, lucky to find enough food to make it through another day. According to this story, prehistoric humans were always on the edge of starvation, always one failed hunt away from death. The archaeological evidence tells a very different story. Analysis of prehistoric bones and teeth reveals that many hunter-gatherer populations had remarkably diverse and nutritious diets. Isotope studies of Neanderthal remains show they ate not just meat from large game, but also fish, shellfish, nuts, berries, and cooked grains. Some coastal populations got substantial nutrition from marine resources: seals, fish, various types of seafood. At Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, archaeologists found grinding stones dating to about 30,000 years ago, with residues of wild grass seeds. People were processing wild grains into flour long before the development of agriculture. This required knowledge of which grasses were nutritious, when to harvest them, how to process them into something edible and storable. But perhaps most telling is the evidence for food storage and seasonal planning. At many prehistoric sites, archaeologists have found storage pits where communities cached food for lean times. Some groups were smoking meat to preserve it for months. Others were drying fish or storing nuts and seeds for winter consumption. This kind of planning requires sophisticated understanding of seasonal cycles. It's the opposite of hand-to-mouth desperation. It's careful resource management based on deep knowledge of the environment. The plant knowledge alone was staggering. Analysis of dental calculus, prehistoric plaque, from Neanderthal teeth revealed traces of numerous plant species, including medicinal plants like yarrow and chamomile. This suggests they weren't just eating plants for calories, but using them to treat pain, infections, or other health problems. At El Cedrón cave in Spain, researchers found evidence that Neanderthals were eating cooked legumes, wild grass seeds, and even tree bark. Some of these foods require special processing to be edible. Legumes might need soaking or cooking to remove toxins. Bark might need to be dried and ground. This suggests detailed knowledge of food preparation techniques. The diversity of tools found at prehistoric sites also hints at specialized knowledge systems. Different stone tools for different tasks. Some for cutting meat, others for scraping hides, others for working wood or bone. This specialization implies not just technical skill, but understanding of which tool worked best for which job. More intriguingly, some individuals seem to have been specialists. At certain sites, archaeologists find evidence of expert toolmakers, areas where someone with exceptional skill was producing large quantities of high-quality stone tools. This suggests that even in small hunter-gatherer bands, people were developing specialized expertise. The social implications are fascinating. If some people were specialists in tool-making, plant medicine, or other skills, then the group as a whole benefited. They had experts who could focus on perfecting particular knowledge domains. This kind of specialization requires a social structure sophisticated enough to support people who weren't spending all their time on basic subsistence. And what about leisure time? Ethnographic studies of recent hunter-gatherer societies suggest that in productive environments, people often met their basic needs with relatively few hours of work per day. The rest of their time was available for social activities, tool maintenance, artistic expression, storytelling, knowledge sharing. By the time agriculture developed around 10,000 years ago, humans had already spent tens of thousands of years perfecting the art of living in harmony with their environment. They had developed sustainable hunting and gathering practices, sophisticated technologies, complex social systems. They weren't primitive people waiting for civilization to rescue them from ignorance. They were skilled practitioners of a way of life that had sustained human communities for hundreds of thousands of years.